Okay, hi everyone. Today we start in time because we have a pretty heavy program today. My name is Philip Huttner from DHI. I'm the business owner for Mike Shi and Mike Plus Rivers, and we would like to continue where we ended up in the last webinar in December. So today I will show you the last missing bit to construct the full 3D groundwater model in Mike Shi, and then I will show you how we at DHI normally do calibration. My initial wish was to really guide you through each single step, but this will probably take several hours. So what I will do instead today, I will show you all the tools and workflows that we normally use to be as efficient as possible with the calibration, which is normally the biggest challenge when doing groundwater models, especially when you do fully integrated groundwater models with Mike Shi. So today I will show you everything that we can offer you. You can request the tools from us. Pretty soon in the new online manual, you will be able to download even some templates of these, but feel free to reach out to me directly. I have prepared a PPT. I will share some of the slides directly here now live, but some of them I will simply neglect. You will be provided with the PPT afterwards, and I will explain it to you verbally in myself instead of, so that I do not lose you on all these slides with a lot of text. Good. Let me share the PPT for the beginning, please. And I plan to do a more intensive course or several webinars on the calibration later this year. So this will be simply a teaser, what is possible and what you can expect in the rest of this year. So today, we will talk about how to build the groundwater model, then some preliminary considerations which you should do always before even going into the calibration process, then how to calibrate it for steady state, afterwards for transient periods, and I will show you also some automatic calibration methods that are available today. How to construct the full 3D groundwater model. Again, I apologize directly for a lot of text, but this is how you should start, right? Before you even start creating your groundwater model, you need to think about really how complex should it be. So are you mainly interested in the changes of water levels and discharges, and groundwater is not the main focus? Then you should not create a very crazy complex 3D groundwater models with 12 layers. You can even change the fully distributed groundwater model in Mike Shi to the more easy linear reservoir method, which is a simplified conceptual approach in order to predict water levels and discharges in the rivers. So this could be also an option. So then you can get rid of all the efforts. Only if you really are interested in the groundwater levels and predictions related to groundwater in a fully distributed way, then you can really try to construct the full 3D groundwater model. But again, if you are only interested in the most upper aquifer, then you cut off the groundwater model at the bottom of the first low conductive aquitard below your main focus area, your main focus aquifer. But if you really need to distinguish between different hydraulic heads and exchange fluxes from upwards to downwards, then you need to do the full 3D groundwater model. Then it's the question, how complex does the hydrological model need to be? If you want to do only static predictions for long-term average effects or measures, like you have a underground wall and you want to see in average how much is the damming up of the water in front of and the drawdown below, or what is the average effect of a groundwater well, then you can restrict yourself to the steady state simulations, and they are the solution for you. Only if you need to distinguish between effects during wet and dry conditions, or you need monthly or daily variations, then transient simulations are a must and you do not get around them. What you should always do before you start the calibration or even the 3D groundwater model construction, look at the measured data that you have. This should be the first step, and try to understand what are the dynamics in your catchment. What you can see here is a depth to groundwater simulated with Mike Shi. We have here the years 2015, 14, 15, 16, 17, and you can directly see it reaches the top. So this is the depth to groundwater at 0 topography. and it becomes sometimes even overland flow. So you have here this top aquifer that is relevant. And you have some dynamics with a variation between 1 and mainly 2 meters, sometimes 3 meters. But you have also other hydrographs that look completely different. For example, here, what you can see is a confined groundwater head. It's very deep, maybe 20 or 30 meters below topography. So the variations within 1 year are quite slow, and you see a long time lag until recharge produces some reactions and dynamics in the groundwater. By the way, what you can see here, the dotted ones are the measured values, like Mike Shee is representing them in the post-processing. I will show you later. And the continuous line is the simulated ones. What you can see, the condition of being confined, I overestimate in this model. That means it could be that my superlying or the upper gravel zones are too low conductive. So this would require some further calibration, but at least the absolute level is not too far away. If you see in one of the hydrographs such things, these steep drawdowns and then a refill, you probably have a well effect. There is a groundwater abstraction ongoing. So you need to consider this also, because you need to implement the groundwater wells as punctual point boundary condition. Otherwise, it's impossible, of course, to simulate such groundwater heads. If you have karstic groundwater heads or karstic aquifers, you can even expect such things. So you see here from 2017 until 2023, you can see drawdowns of several meters. So they normally show a very strong variation and steep rising and falling trends over short periods of time, because they have very fast reaction times. So this is always an indication that you have a karstic aquifer, which is always challenging. The same you should do with your river runoffs, right? Look at the discharges, because here you can see the effect or the ratio of direct runoff and base flow originated groundwater contributions. So these small peaks that show you always that you have probably a steep gradient in the topography and you have strong direct runoff processes. And the long-term minimum flow here, the blue parts at the bottom, these are probably groundwater originated. So what you can see here during summer peaks, you have very strong summer rainfall. In this case, it's Central Europe, Germany, and you have quite low base flow contributions of maybe only 1 or 2 cubic meters per second, but they should be continuously there. And another good example, what you can see here again here, this is again the discharge. The small dots are the measured discharges for a catchment, and the continuous line is a simulated one. And what you can see here, the measured ones, during summer goes to 0, and in the winter period it's rising up to 0.4. Sometimes there are smaller peaks around close to 1 cubic meters per second, but at the summer it always goes to 0. But my simulated run here shows a very high base flow throughout the first years. Why? In this groundwater model setup, I'm overestimating the groundwater heads. That means my groundwater head is continuously above ground in some areas of the model and are continuously recharging the river. So I'm overestimating here the hydraulic. I'm underestimating here probably the hydraulic conductivities in the groundwater aquifer, and that is why my groundwater heads are overestimated, and so my discharges in the river are. So you can even see here, based on these charts, that you're probably overestimating the groundwater because you have a fully integrated model here. So once you have done all these considerations, check your measured data, which you want to match with your model. The question is, as in the very beginning I told you, think about how complex must it be. Pretty often it's maybe even sufficient to do a very simple one. You do only one dummy layer and you don't care too much about the thickness because you will balance it out with changing the hydraulic conductivities. This is what you normally do if you're mainly interested in the surface water flows in the rivers. Then you do not need to perfectly represent all the hydraulic the aquifer bottoms, and you can calibrate. You have more degrees of freedom in your hydraulic conductivity. The more advanced and maybe most common one is you interpolate the point borehole data for each layer. I will show you that one in a practical example, because this is normally the first challenge where many people fail already. If you're doing groundwater models for several years and you're a very good hydrogeologist, then you probably have anyway a third-party software to model the hydrogeological layers in 3D yourself. For example, in Denmark, widely used is the Geocene 3D. There you can really load in your point data as such borehole columns and interpolate the layers in 3D. Exactly the same solution is Leapfrog. It's more used globally, kind of. I must admit, this is the one that we normally use for our complex 3D groundwater models, because we have here the expertise from some geologists. And also another very common software product is GeoModeler. Let's assume you're not a geologist or hydrogeologist. You would probably want to do it yourself. I will show you now a method how to do it in GIS yourself. So what you always should do, you should take a first look at some hydrogeological profile. In this case, here it's Eastern Bavaria and South Germany. You see here the yellow part, this is an aquitard. And here the dotted areas are, here is some clay, hilly area. And here the gravel one, this is really the aquifers. I'm interested in this part actually. And this is an aquitard. So if I would like to now do my conceptual model, I can already frame a little bit what I want to represent. If you would be a pure FeeFlow or ModFlow modeler, you would probably even start your model here, because you want to neglect surface water flows that come into your model, or you cannot represent them. With MikeShe, you could also account for the surface and the rain, the surface flows and the rain that is falling on the hilly area, running here along the tails of the valley, and then recharging your aquifer here at the boundaries. So if you would like to do this one in MikeShe, you would probably go here for this blue line. Then you probably get borehole data. For each point, you get such a profile. You can see in here, this is the typical German classification. This orange color indicates sand, and here you have clay. This is my aquitard. Sometimes, of course, you have some intersecting layers, and it's up to you if you see the spatial distribution, if they are only locally a geological lens, which you can simulate in MikeShe also, or if it's really a continuous layer that you have to interpolate from one borehole to the next one. And I will show you that now in real life, very quick. So I assume that you start with an Excel where you have your borehole data, X, Y, and Z. So what I have here, I have my model domain already delineated before I start the geological model. And I have my borehole data. This is where I start from. In this case, I already added some additional points that are not real borehole data. Give me a So in reality, I have only these data sets. And I need to derive a surface for them. But what I can already see, if you interpolate these ones, I do it here in ArcGIS. For the beginning, you can make a very coarse grid resolution. And I have a first surface. But if you remember the cross-section profile I showed to you, it is probably kind of a basin structure, right? So I have a basin inside a valley. So in order to influence the interpolation a little bit, I added some more values. You can really yourself, you need to have a picture inside your brain, of course, but you can really add new points. Oop. Or copy existing ones and give them a different value. So you really manually manipulate the source data. And if you do then the same interpolation again, you get a more continuous grid. But it's still only single points. Then you can play around a little bit with options that you have. In this case, I use this power function. So that it is less a single dot. And now you see you get closer to some kind of continuous basin structure. And what you can do then, derive from this grid isolines. I save them now only in memory. I make it a time stepping or a distance of 10 only. That looks now like that. Let's say I would like to have another isoline here, especially for representing the deeper ones. I change here the stepping to 5 meters. So I would like to have an isoline every 5 meters. Then I get here another one. And then you can do the same thing like with the points. You modify these isolines a little bit, especially because you want to get rid of these northern parts, for example. And then you could even use these isolines already directly as shapefile input into MikeShe. I will show you in a minute. But what you can also do, if you get new single borehole data, or let's say these isolines do not represent your imagination, how you think the area should look like. Of course, you can also easily modify these yourself. You have here, at least in ArcGIS, where I feel more comfortable with, the option to simplify a little bit the isolines or make it smoother. And if you say, oh, I think the deepest ones should extend a little bit more to this area, you can modify it yourself, the isolines. And if you think the isolines match your imagination, you can use the topo to raster in GIS. And make it again a coarse one with 100 meter resolution. For this exercise, save it only into the memory. And you see here now, it reflects more my isolines. And if you have a grid, you probably already know what to do, because this is what I showed you last time in the first webinar. So you have here a grid. You can convert this grid to conversion tools to ASCII, from raster to ASCII, and with the Mic 0 toolbox, watch the last webinar if you could not attend how to do it. From there, you can easily convert the ASCII raster with the Mic 0 toolbox into a DFS2 and use this as bottom for your aquifer. Now, in this case, I would like to show you another model where we did it actually with Leapfrog. That shows a more complex approach. And let's assume you ended up last time with your model, or you ended up with your model where we were last time. That means you have constructed a new Mike-Shi model for the overland flow, the rivers. No, rivers I have not shown to you. I will show you that soon. But you have constructed the unsaturated flow, the evapotranspiration, and you were simply missing the saturated flow. You turn this one on. And then you can, within here, geological layers, define your geological layers, new ones. In this case, I have already added 3 of them. Let's assume you start from scratch or you want to add a new layer. The drop-down, you have now here a new layer. And here it's asking for the lower level. Here you can even select points, but the interpolation method then indicates some uncertainty. But you can also choose here already the isolines. Normally, we directly prepare DFS2 grids for each bottom, use them here, and then we get a bottom for our aquifer. When you turn on the groundwater, you have several options. You can include pumping wells, of course. You can include subsurface drainage. This is the indirect representation of rivers. You can choose how you want to assign the parameters. That means you can make a DFS2 grid for each hydraulic conductivity, or you make it in geological units. This is the recommended approach from our side, because then you have only one grid code for each layer, and you can choose for each layer which value should be applied. So for, let's say, here, this is my top aquifer. I give it the Solcoid 1. It has a certain hydraulic conductivity, which equals, in this case, the vertical hydraulic conductivity, and I have a specific yield and a specific storage. Then you need to define for each geological layer the lower level, which you derived with Leapfrog or with this very simple GIS workflow I shared with you. And then you need to give the model another grid, which is only a grid code. This is kind of a region or a zone where a certain parameter shall be applied. In this case, the blue one here is the 1. You can see it here in the bottom. This is my grid code 1, the blue one. So for this layer, it takes this bottom and applies all the values here defined or based on the extent of these zones. Doing it like that, of course, I can build all the other layers also. So they have different lower levels, different geological distributions. This is, by the way, 80% of a final calibration. In this case, I can delete this new layer and then change here the values. So whenever we do a new model from very scratch, before we start any calibration process, we construct the full model that we want to have at the end, everything. But what we normally do, before we go into the transient calibration directly, which would take a lot of time to converge, we start with a kind of not straightforward, but pretty efficient workflow that we carved out together with my colleagues, for example, Sultan, who is also within this call. So what we do, we prepare every module as it is, but then for a kind of preliminary dummy run, we deactivate the saturated zone. And we apply a depth to phatic surface or an absolute grid of the hydraulic heads as lower boundary condition, and we neglect the complete groundwater model for the moment. Because this, let's say, makes you get rid of the full uncertainty that comes along with the hydraulic conductivities of the groundwater module. So you can concentrate only on calibrating the unsaturated zone model the same way, let's say the part of the model that I showed you in the last webinar. Because let's assume you directly go for the transient calibration with the full 3D groundwater model, and you're underestimating the hydraulic conductivities by a factor of 100, which is not a rare case that can happen quite quickly. Then you would have an overestimation of the groundwater module that turns into a lot of overland flow in your model, and it's running forever because it's too computational challenging kind of. So in order, let's say you can see here in the background these dark lines, these dark continuous lines. These are very rough groundwater isolines that we have here from the federal state or from the municipality, or you derived these groundwater isolines yourself in GIS the same way I did it with the borehole data. Then you can again use the to raster function in GIS, turn this groundwater isoline plan into a raster, and use this as lower boundary condition and get rid of taking care for all the hydraulic conductivities. Then you run this model for a very long period, let's say 10 years. Here we are running from 2013 to 2023. Then you produce a kind of, let's call it preliminary recharge. It has a recharge rate in millimeters per day for each time step, kind of. Let's have a look. This is the one I showed you at the end of the last session. So this runs through. And what you can do, you can average this grid by using the Make Zero toolbox. It's called txstat. Statistics on metric series. Then you choose the file. Total recharge to saturated zone. It's called like that. You select the whole simulation period. Of course, you could do the averaging also for single periods for the whole model domain and take the mean values. Then you produce a kind of grid that is giving you a mean recharge rate. And when you've done that, you go to the model, make a copy of it, and now you try to do a steady state calibration for the groundwater model. I know that's not too much common and that not everybody knows it, but you have within the saturated zone here the steady state mode. Most of you are probably using the PCG transient mode, but you have here the steady state mode. And then you turn the precipitation rate, which was originally probably a time series for this long-term recharge run. You change it to fully distributed and take this preliminary recharge grid. You see here we have even negative values in the lower areas where we have groundwater tables close to the surface and positive recharge values in the topographically higher lying areas here. And then you can go for the steady state simulation. Why do you do that? Let's assume you have you directly go for the transient calibration, as I said, and you are far away from real hydraulic conductivities. It will take you forever. The groundwater will rise forever until you get some kind of equilibrium state. I have to change now the machine, and I will show you how this steady state simulation works. So this is the same model. Another thing for the very beginning, try to do not make your model over complex. Try to deactivate, let's say, too many add-on modules like ponded drainage for saturated zone or ponded drainage for overland flow. Don't make your river network too dense, and even reduce the spatial resolution. Let's say your final resolution of the model should be 40 meters, 50 meters, 25. Go for 100 or even 200 meters and reduce the number of cells to a large extent. This will be sufficient for the groundwater model. And then you are very fast with the first calibration steps, which are normally, as I said, far away from reality. So you have a very efficient model that is running quite fast. In this case, you see the same model, which I showed you. We have these 3 layers. We have here different geological unit distributions. And let's say I did here a first run. I have here my stations, groundwater monitoring stations. You can add them here one by one. You can add here a new item. If you want to start calibrating groundwater monitoring station 1, then you have several items which shall be produced as a single time series. In this case, it would be the head elevation. You can directly give here the numbers, or you take here the location cross and set it here. And then you can say the depth below ground, at which aquifer it should be. You can include observation data, like I did it for the other ones. So we have here preprocessed the time series in the DFS0, select the correct value, click OK. I delete this one because it's now a random one. I added all the other stations already that I have for this model. And this is how it looks like after a steady state simulation. It does not go over time. I can rerun it because it runs only a few seconds. And if the hydraulic conductivity is far away from your correct value, you can see quite quickly, and the model has less convergence problems. Sometimes you will see here single jumps. This is a solver thing which you can kind of ignore. Let's run it. So I normally run it only for 10 days and it's done. So we, of course, see now the same results because I did not change anything. Now, let's assume I pick here this station. It's called Vernico OP for upper aquifer. It's located here in the north part of the model. And I would like to match that one better. So if I look here at the time series that was produced, Vernico, I see that I'm underestimating it, right? My mean error is minus 2.5. So what I say, where am I? It's probably this orange area. So I make a copy of that model. Call it geological unit 8, which I want to change to, in this case, 1E-7. I go to the geological units. I search for the grid for the geological unit 8. It's at the moment 7 to the power E-6. E-7. Change here the value. Click on pre-processing. Run it again. While it is running, I show you something else. What you should always do in the very beginning, you probably collect all your groundwater stations somewhere in Excel. You do the pre-processing, or you have some Python codes, I don't know. Then you have one here, one timestamp kind of in the first column. And here I have all my values. And this will be my input for the transient DFS0, right? They have exactly the same format. And then we do normally always a maximum, average, and a minimum. And then based on the average values, you can do a transient time series, but it has the same values at all time steps. That is how you can prepare your steady state simulation. It's done. Let me open the previous model also so that we can compare it. So I look again at the Copernicus station. I have now lowered the hydraulic conductivity in order to bring up the groundwater, basics of hydrogeology or groundwater modeling. Now the view is not exactly the same. So you can see here the mean error was minus 2.59, and now the mean error is still minus or plus 2.4. I'm still underestimating. You can see here the dots are these constant values in a transient DFS0. And actually we are coming up a little bit. Here the lowest value is around 68. Originally it was around, a little bit closer. So obviously that did not have too much of an effect. Why? Well, you need to probably the hydrological setting here. It is actually the top geological unit in where the station is located. But if I go here to the preprocessed data, I know the location is somewhere here. I can already see here is the low conductive material. I can, with this button, make a hydrogeological cross-section, take the X, the hydraulic conductivity in the X direction, and the calculation layers. I give it some colors that I normally choose here based on the German guidelines. We have here plenty of prepared color palettes. Sorry, that was the wrong one. Here it is. That aligns again with the typical colors here. So purple is normally clay range of values. Here we have silt and orange is the sand. And my station is probably somewhere here. So I lowered here the area already. I can show you how it looks like in the previous model. So here is everything green. And we reduced here the hydraulic conductivity, so it's becoming purple. But what I can see, this low conductive area, it's surrounded by a high conductive sand. So I guess that even if I change here the hydraulic conductivity, the area will still be drained by this orange area. So the hydraulic head is always connected to the downstream. So instead of changing this value, I lower a little bit more the hydraulic conductivity of this red area. Let's check which unit it is. That's unit 1. I see at the bottom value equals 1. Here in the downstream it's plotted. So I change 1 to directly with power of 10 to see some effect. I think it was 1e, it was 6e minus 4. Let's make it, we need to lower it. So 6e minus 5. For those ones of you who have already experience with groundwater models, that didn't work out. Probably because I lowered it too much. That means the groundwater table is calculated too much above topography, and then the solver has problems. So I'm too far away from reality. So I reduce it a little bit again. Now it's running better. We remember the minus, what was it, 260? Minus 260. And now the values are completely crap because the value is probably still too low. You can see now the error is quite large. The thing is that the steady state solver is very sensitive to small changes, more than a transient run. But this way you can try to improve your steady state run or the steady state model in order to reduce the uncertainty in the hydraulic conductivities. Once you have done that, you have your model with the tuned values. Then you turn on everything again, and you can go now for the fine calibration, including everything. So you're now producing the recharge yourself within the model with the unsaturated zone and calibrating the groundwater models and the rivers in one thing. Once you go to the transient simulation, check where I am. You can assume that you have probably achieved already a quite good result in terms of the absolute values, which is the purpose of the steady state calibration. And you go now to the transient one. So you say your groundwater heads are already more or less in the correct absolute level. That's the wrong one. Here we are. And you get now time series. So you have activated again all the models. You changed here the same stations with the link from the transient, from the constant values now really to the values that you have seen some minutes ago in Excel. So you have really time series. And then you run it again for a couple of years. Maybe jumping to one slide before I forget it. When you start with the transient calibration, it's again important to look at the data, like I showed you in the very beginning. Ideally, you choose a good calibration period that represents nearly an equilibrium state at the beginning. So if you see here are meters above sea level, the red ones here is the measured one. The mean is around 80. So I would probably start somewhere in an average year here. I would not start in a very falling period or a rising period. You could start here at the beginning of the hydrological water management year, 1st November of 2008 here in Germany. Then you have one average year, then you have a rising period, and you have a falling period. So this could be a good calibration period for this kind of model setup. Then you insert these DFS zeros, run it for 2013 to 2019. And since you have done already more or less good steady state calibration, your vertical offset is obviously probably only within a few meters. So in this case, it's 3 meters. The dynamics already look quite good. But what you do then, you have this station again, it's Vernico. The measured data here shows me a smooth trend. It's the upper groundwater layer, not the lower one. Otherwise, it would be even more buffered. But what I can see here, I'm a little bit too low. This is the remaining error from the steady state calibration. And I have especially an offset. I have a lag. So in this case, you can see here, The lowest value measured is reached at December 2014, but I simulate the lowest point later, nearly 2 months later. You will not be able to improve this time lag with the saturated zone hydraulic conductivities inside here. Here you mainly control the vertical absolute levels. What you need to do here, or what is the effect, what you can see here. Here, the unsaturated zone above the ground, above the aquifer, let it be 3 or 5 meters, has a too high porosity and or a too low hydraulic conductivity. That means the precipitation that is falling here in the winter is retained too much in the soil zone, and it takes too much time to percolate downwards. So what you can do, you can adjust now the unsaturated zone parameters. As you know from the last webinar, the unsaturated zone module is defined here normally. I can show you in a fully distributed way through a grid. And for each zone, you have a single soil zone. For the sake of simplicity here, I changed it to a uniform value, which now dropped. Give me a second. Here it is. So I have here defined, also again, for simplicity, only one soil. It's called middle sand. And I'll have a look at here the value that I have chosen, LD2. We can see here for sand, there's a pretty high relative moisture content. I would say it's a little bit too high. So in order to reduce the, let's say, kind of porosity or let's say capacity of the soil to hold back water, I can adjust these values here. I can lower them, for example, to 2.5. You can see here how the curve changes immediately. So this was roughly the original value. And now we reduce a little bit the capacity of the soil to hold back water, which is actually this triangle below the curve. Then I rerun the model. And you see it looks completely different. The offset now is gone. Let me open the previous one. So we have this very flat curve. And now I reduce the porosity and it's getting even too peaky. The offset is gone. I reached the lowest point even too early. So probably the correct value is somewhere in between. So when you do a calibration, not talking about the rivers at this point, you will probably start with the hydraulic conductivity of the groundwater model. This is the most of the cases, the most sensitive parameter. And if you're under or overestimating the dynamics, you should adjust the unsaturated zone parameters. This is a fully integrated model. I would not recommend you to try to achieve anything with the Manning number or the roughness, because the soil parameters are more sensitive in order to produce direct runoff or not. So what I showed you here is the kind of manual calibration. If you have only a few stations, this is a good way to do it, right? This is the most easy one. I must say that thanks to the two colleagues, Max and Sultan, once we have, when you have bigger models and you have to deal with several stations, it's becoming more complicated to get an overview. Where is my hydrograph? Where is the location? Did I make an improvement or did I worsen the result compared to the previous one? So what they did, they prepared an Excel template. We will create a separate video in order to train you on that one. It looks a little bit complicated for the beginning, but if you spend a little bit of time in learning it, you can increase your efficiency a lot. So this is an Excel template that shows you always the version. You have to prepare it, of course, for your model setup on time. You have here the geological table. This is directly copy-paste from the MikeShe model. Then you have your monitoring stations, X and Y, head simulated, head observed. And then you have exactly the parameters that you can produce yourself. Where is it? Here. During the post-processing. So I showed you here this hydrograph comparison. But here you have the generate statistics button. Let me go to the result, which was more plausible. If you do it for the steady state, I recommend you to choose, of course, the stable last time steps. For example, here from the 8th November to the 10th. Generate statistics. It takes several minutes, not for this case. And then you have here this table. And you can copy paste the values from this table into the prepared Excel sheet and paste the values over these ones. This gives you a good overview, over this part of the table. This is exactly the columns like they come from MikeShe, so you don't have to calculate anything yourself. There's also a function that always compares the values with the previous run here. So you can always see also the change to the previous last run. And what they also did, and this is probably the one for the ones that are already using MikeShe out there, the most interesting one, they have prepared a nice HTML tool. And this tool is prepared exactly for this kind of steady state Excel sheet that you can maintain yourself. So if you choose this file, you can directly highlight your stations. This works for every model as long as you stick to the structure of this Excel sheet. You can check then here the mean error, the mean absolute error in terms of colors. We will probably add here also a color bar and the legend. And you can even check the change of the mean error to the previous run. You can zoom in, they are labeled. In this case, for example, you can see that this station here is completely underestimated. That's too low. Because here, this is the, let's say, top part of the model. The hydraulic conductivities are underestimated. You can use the same Excel sheet also for transient runs. It has more or less the same structure. You again overwrite only the mean error and the table from MikeShe. So if I choose here, if I open another session of this HTML, and I choose here the transient one, you see it again. And what you can do also, let's assume you take the small effort to prepare your observed values in this structure, like you have to do it anyway if you want to load it in as DFS0. And you spend the half a minute of copy pasting your DFS0 result also in that structure. You can use this HTML plot, load in observed data. You can use it already like that actually before you start the calibration to get a better feeling for your values. And if you click to a point, you see station by station the time series. But you can also add here your model results and directly see the same comparison between hydrographs as you do it in MikeShe. So what can you see in here? As I said, this is the groundwater here flows from south to north. You have here a hilly part think I haven't opened even the model. Yeah. So here the groundwater is kind of has a recharge zone, and then it flows into this peatland. This is a peatland rewetting study that we are supporting here in Nienburg, Lower Saxonia. And what is happening? The hydraulic conductivity is way overestimated, or was overestimated in the first runs. That's why the aquifer here is emptying completely out. It's draining all the water into the peatlands. And of course, what you can see then here, sorry, is a strong rise, obviously, because the water is not maintained in this area where it should be, and it does not flow to here. So if I load now one of the latest runs that Zoltan did, click at the same station, you can see that he reduced the hydraulic conductivity in this area significantly, nearly matches the values. And if you go now to the other station, the green one, you can see that this rising trend, he changed obviously also the simulation period, is now gone away. And actually the dynamics are already looking quite good. There are other stations within the peat that look already quite good. I think you can even zoom in here to single sections. And you can see here when the peat layer is rising until the topography. So this is actually the tool we use right now for the moment. Maybe we have the capacities to lift up the solution kind of in the MikeSheet GUI next year. As long as this is not done, feel free to ask for the tool from us. Then we have only a few minutes left. For the moment, for MikeSheet, you have two options to do automatic calibration. One is here the AutoCal. This is delivered with Mike 0. If you purchase MikeSheet, you can use this for free. I will show you in a second how that works. And another option would be the MikeCal setup. This is actually developed by Copenhagen University in cooperation with GEOS, a half-state authority in Denmark. They offer also now approaches for pest and ostrich. It needs some Python experience for sure. We tested it here ourselves, and we are working on improving it a little bit for our purposes, and we are happy to share that in the soon future. So I would for sure recommend you strongly, when you start with a model from scratch, never start with the automatic calibration yourself directly, because you are not sure if you really have defined all the boundary conditions correctly. And what normally automatic calibration methods cannot do is change boundary conditions. They cannot produce a well where it isn't already set by you. And if you are missing an outflow boundary condition in the second groundwater layer or whatever, the model will not see it. That means if you're missing the outflow boundary condition, the model or the automatic calibration will probably increase the hydraulic conductivity a lot to bring down the excess amount of groundwater flow. So at least for the very beginning, for the first runs where you go for a very coarse resolution, short time period of time, do it manually. And once you have a good feeling for the catchment, you can do a kind of automatic calibration for the fine tuning. Let me see where I have the file. I must admit this AutoCal tool is a very old one. It's not too good maintained. So you need to consider for sure some aspects in order to not get lost. Also, the error messaging is not as satisfying as it should be. But how would it look like? You would create a new Mike 0 AutoCal tool, save it somewhere. I will make a separate training on that also soon. If you want to make it very quick and easy, you need to select here a model simulation sequence file, which is actually simply the SHE file, model SHE. Then you need a model parameter file. It must be ASCII formatted. So everything that is binary is not readable by AutoCal, and these parameters can sit within the she file. They can also sit within the river file or any other ASCII file that is of mic format. And then once you have selected the she file, tricky, nobody told you, it will suggest you to create a so-called template file. So you click on edit, then it will do something, you don't know what. It will create a copy of this model, which is called as the model underscore AutoCal. And if you go here, for example, for the geological units, you need to create here kind of flag values. So let's assume this value was initially 1e minus 5. These flag values are always with the convention 1.0 whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to the power e minus 35. Then the setup will recognize these values under model parameters. It is highly recommended that you don't start with the first flag value at the bottom, but as you know, she is a text readable file. It should be the same sorting in the AutoCal file. So you start with these flag values. Then you need to define some objective function. For example, weighted sum of squares function. And then you can select here observation point 1. You need to select the previous output that shall be compared to versus the target. For example, here, if we go again for our Venico station, this is the produced one from Mike Sheen versus the target file, which is the measured one. Then you need to define here the name of the function that you have defined up here. And then you can click through all that stuff. I will jump now over that because we're out of time, and I will make a separate webinar and a training course on this AutoCal anyway. So this is how you can set up an automatic calibration. Again, I would recommend you not to do it for too many values at the same time, because it will always run a combination of these. And the more you combine within one run, the longer it takes. But if you combine this automatic calibration with the steady state simulations, it's very powerful. And you can get rid of hundreds of transient runs and save a lot of time and increase your efficiency during the modeling workflow. I would do it always section by section. And whenever you start the calibration, start from the top. Because as you can see in this HTML file, when you are doing something wrong at the very top regions of your model, it influences the whole middle part. And the same way, the very outlet does not influence the center part too much. So whenever you start your calibration, start with a coarse model, a simple one, add the complexity step by step, and start to calibrate alongside the groundwater flow. So from the top values to the lower values. And that's it for today.